This page of the N64 magazine from February 99, issue 25, it's a bit of a grim-looking cover, isn't it? They've got this chap, looks like a right tough nut, holding a skull, promoting Shadow Man. Zombie horror. Zelda's evil twin, they're calling it. Bit much, weren't magazines always like that? World exclusive, and all the hype. Looks like they've reviewed Star Wars Rogue Squadron, saying in-flight fight, it's the best Star Wars yet. Bit of a bold claim back then, but Rogue Squadron was pretty good. Flying an X-Wing was always a laugh. Mario Party's been reviewed too. Mario and the gang are back? Those were the days of shouting at your mates playing Mario Party, good times. And then there's the usual promises of Zelda secrets revealed and Turok 2 tipped. Always something like that to get you to buy it. Says free with this issue. Our 13th double game guide. Can't go wrong with a free guide, can you? And a tiny box mentioning Body Harvest and Silicon Valley. Probably tucked away in that guide, I reckon. Yeah, typical N64 mag, all the big hitters covered. This page is the welcome bit for N64 Magazine, issue number 3, back in February 99. They were really pushing the fact they were the biggest and best-selling N64 mag in Britain. They bang on about how they're independent from Nintendo and do honest reviews, even if a game is rubbish, which was always reassuring back then. They also mention getting their news from all over the place, Europe, Japan, America, so you knew you were getting the proper scoop, not just internet rumors. Tim Weaver, the editor, starts off his welcome message with a bit of a flu moan and some strange jokes about Steven Seagal, bless him. He then gets on to mentioning games like Shadow Man, which they were clearly hyped about, calling it like Zelda, apparently, and Rogue Squadron. Sounds like they've got reviews for South Park, Micro Machines, Mario Party, and the usual suspects like Turok 2 and Zelda in this issue, plus guides to Pikachu and Perfect Dark. Simpler times. This page then, right, is the contents page of the magazine. Up top we've got Planet 64, that's the news bit, starts on page 12. Apparently Zelda was selling like hotcakes, and they're talking about fanzines and retro games. Bit of a mixed bag there then. Next up is N64 Arena, the review section, starting on page 40. They've been playing Star Wars Rogue Squadron, sounds like Airborne Mayhem, and South Park Sweary Kids, apparently in PAL format, whatever that means for South Park. Micro Machines 64 Turbo gets a mention, smaller and funkier, and Centra Court Tennis, something about smashing it in Blighty. And Penny Racers is in there too, Micro Machines, but not as good, alright then. Then there's Coming Soon, on page 16, giving us a peek at what's coming up. They're banging on about Carmageddon 2, Battle Tanks, Mario Golf 64, Rayman 2, Winback, and Snowboard Kids 2. Quite the list in it. Down below, regulars, page 24 onwards. An Englishman in Tokyo, always a bizarre read. Information station, new games and charts, fair enough. N64 shopper, for import games. N64 magazine issue 26 inches previewing the next issue naturally. And what if? One letter changed and a whole new ball game, cryptic that is. Import Arena starts on page 58, Japanese and American games, like Mario Party, first Mario game of the year apparently, Nightmare Creatures with monsters and rubbish controls charming, Kurato Kaiketsu, fishy board game like Cluedo apparently, and Pikachu Genki Detchu, Nintendo's cute Electro thing speaking out. Right then, and at the bottom, 1999 Reader Awards, vote for your favorite game of 98. And a V-Rally winner car compo, try and throw this car into the bargain bin, cheeky. That's your lot then. This page is the contents page for an N64 mag, in it? Right then, let's have a butcher's. At the top we've got Future Look, teasing the big new N64 games, starting on page 8, naturally. Seems a bit generic, probably just a roundup of what's coming out. Worry. Then there's a bit about All-Star Tennis, new pictures of brand new racket game. Looks alright, a bit like Virtua Tennis but probably not as good. Page 8 for that one too. Next to it is Smash Bros, Nintendo Fighter Exposed, it's ace. Yeah, we knew Smash Bros was coming. Looks like a right laugh with all the Nintendo characters biffing each other. Page 10 for that. Down the side we have N64 Club 64, says, the ultimate reader service. Sounds like the usual letters page and stuff, starts on page 69. Mailbox is mentioned. Boy oh boy is there a box full of mail. Cheeky. How-to section, guides to ease you through life. Bit dramatic for a gaming mag, in it. Get all the weapons and equipment in. Zelda, page 76. Ocarina of Time, must be well out by now, so this is probably a guide to finding everything. Always handy. Save the Universe in Turok 2, page 84. Turok 2, that was supposed to be a bit of alright, dinosaurs and guns, always a winner, ma pair. Then there's SHADO, WMAN. Blimey, they're calling it the N64's goriest game yet. Serial killers, voodoo, and naked corpses. Core, sounds a bit much, doesn't it? Exclusive first look, on page 30. That image is a bit grim, mind, skull and all. Perfect dark. We asked you what should be in it and you told us. Right, sounds like they've been getting reader input. Read on and find out. Page 36. Perfect dark, yeah, that's the spiritual successor to GoldenEye, everyone was waiting for that one. Keybook. Finally, special interrogation Dave Jones, the head of DMA, takes the ultimate test. Page 124. Dave Jones, he's DMA Design, that's the guys who did Lemmings and Body Harvest, and they're doing Grand Theft Auto later on, so this could be interesting to see what he's up to. And at the bottom, February 1999. Crikey. Time flies, doesn't it? This page from N64 Magazine is having a gander at some future N64 titles. Look in massive letters, very subtle. First up, it's All-Star Tennis 99. Blimey, they've given it an 8 out of 10. Balls, rackets, bombs and tennis stuff. Well, that's descriptive, isn't it? Apparently, ever since Pong, tennis games have been a thing. This one reckons it's going to be the top tennis game on the N64, comparing it to Super Tennis on the SNES, which is high praise I suppose, especially as Martin apparently thinks he's unbeatable at that. They've got real tennis folk in it, names like Novotná, Coetzer, and Martinez for the ladies, and Chang, Bjorkman, Krajicek, Querton and Philippoussis for the chaps. Sounds like a decent roster. Apparently there's special moves and stuff, if you like that sort of thing in your tennis. And if teleporting tennis balls are too much, you can always play a more sober version, good to know. Doubles mode is a laugh with mates, especially if you've got a useless one to cover for. Their words, not mine. And they mention fictional players who look a bit like famous tennis stars, and a secret court and extra player to unlock. Sounds like standard stuff. Review next month apparently, keeping us hanging on. Then there's Smash Bros, given a massive 10 out of 10. Make Mario batter Yoshi senseless. Well, that sums that game up nicely, doesn't it? There's a couple of screenshots of the tennis game too, looking alright for the time, very polygonal. One of them mentions Amand Coetzer taking a graceful swing, and diving leading to skin grafts, charming. And it's from Ubisoft, coming out in March, both US and UK. So there you go, tennis and smashing. What more could you want? This page shows a preview for All-Star Tennis 99 on the N64. Right then, looks like another tennis game, but this one seems a bit different to your average serve and volley. The main image is from the Smash Tennis or arcade mode. It mentions they're similar but allow for special moves, which sounds like a bit of fun. They've got a screenshot of the menu showing bomb tennis too, which the review describes as leaving fizzing bombs where the ball bounces. Bit daft, but could be a laugh with mates. Another screenshot shows the special moves in-action teleport shots. And blue vortexes, alright, sounds like they're really going for it. Then there's action replay, which they say is good for showing off your smashes, and a section on real players, saying the in-game characters are based on real tennis pros, and the crowd reactions are supposedly realistic, like cheering for Philippoussis in Australia or, well, maybe not so polite noises for Conchita Martinez at Wimbledon. Cheeky! Overall, it seems like they're trying to spice up tennis a bit, not just your average gruntfest, could be alright for a bit of N64 multiplayer fun. This page gives us even more pictures of Nintendo's explosive beat-em-up, which we can only assume at this point is Super Smash Bros. They're really teasing this one out, aren't they? It talks about how after Zelda 64 they're busy with this 4-player scrap, something apparently no one has tried before in a fighting game. Bit of a bold claim, but alright Nintendo, we'll see. Warrington Norgroup. There's a few screenshots dotted about, showing Donkey Kong giving Link a bit of a pasting on what looks like a Star Fox ship stage. Then there's Pikachu battling in a city, and Yoshi seemingly getting a good kicking on his stage, which they reckon looks incredible, bit much maybe. And finally, 4 Pikachus having a rumble in Donkey Kong's jungle stage. They're saying the figures at the top of the screen are for the one-player game, damage percentages and all that, and they disappear in multiplayer, which makes sense. Apparently there are 2 types of 4-player mode, battle mode and stock mode. Battle mode sounds like you have to get the most hits in, and avoid getting hit yourself. Working out some strike-to-fall ratio thing. Stock mode is simpler, everyone starts with 300%, and it goes down as you get hit. Sounds like a right laugh with a few mates, especially after a few beers, probably get a bit chaotic. They're really pushing the 4-player aspect, aren't they? Still, it's Nintendo, they usually know what they're doing. This page of N64 Magazine from back in '99 is having a gander at Super Smash Bros. Looks like it's still a bit before we got our hands on it here in the UK. It's all about the bangers and smash apparently, which is a bit of alright title for a fighting game in it. They're showing off some screenshots, Pikachu zapping someone, Yoshi looking a bit too big for his boots, Fox getting ready to rumble with Mario, and Donkey Kong being a bit of a bully to Matza. Kirby and Yoshi are mentioned as well, battling for cute honors, whatever that means. Seems like the camera pulls right out to keep everyone in shot, which is fair enough in a 4-player brawl. Warrington Neighbor. The review is on about how the arenas are all 3D and multi-leveled, and they're banging on about no split screen, which was a bit of a novelty back then for a multiplayer scrapper. Power-ups are scattered about, and bow-bombs can be used to cause a bit of chaos. They reckon it's all a laugh, and even if Donkey Kong's gouging Mario's eyes out, they'll all be mates again afterwards. Typical Nintendo really, keeping it all jolly. There's a little bit about the UK release being winter, after the Japanese one in January. And they're promising a review of the Jap version next month. Level looks a bit sparse, but hey, it's early days in it. Still, looks like a bit of fun for a laugh with your mates. This page is all about the frankly ridiculous demand for Zelda. Ocarina of Time back in '99. Remember trying to find a copy of that? Nightmare. Apparently, even pre-orders weren't guaranteed, which is just mental. It's saying here initial shipments of 100,000 copies sold out instantly, and they reckon 170,000 copies shifted in the first 9 days. Bonkers. Apparently it did even better in Japan, sold 1 million in a week, thanks to some crazy Famitsu score. They're calling it the best game ever. A bit strong maybe, but it was good. And of course everyone was moaning about shops not having enough copies. There are a couple of screenshots of Link and Zelda looking all heroic. Oh, and they mentioned FIFA 99 being popular, but let's be honest, everyone wanted Zelda. There's a list of names on the side, probably the people who work at the magazine, but who cares about that? This page from the magazine takes me right back to the late 90s and the N64 days, doesn't it? Starting off with the shortcuts section, it mentions Interplay gearing up for some Nintendo releases, mentioning Clay Fighter, which was a bit of a Marmite game back then, wasn't it? And games for the Color Game Boy. VR Pool 64 and Milo's Astro Lanes also get a quick nod. Not exactly must-have titles, I remember. Then there's a piece about new Nintendo hardware. Typical rumor mill stuff at the time. They're hinting at a new console, something with DVD and PC-style network capability, which sounds like pie-in-the-sky thinking back then. But they reassure us that the N64 black box of joy still has life in it, and the new console isn't expected until 2000 or 2001. The big headline in the middle of the page is out, talking about Zelda, Ocarina of Time's massive success, saying it's outstripped Tomb Raider 2, which was a big deal at the time, but production issues meant not everyone could get a copy. They mentioned Turok 2 being released in December, which was another game gobbling up cartridge production. Nar. And the main event, Donkey Kong confirmed. Finally, Donkey Kong 64 is officially announced by Rare. They reckon it'll be out by the end of the year after Perfect Dark. Based on a screenshot, it's looking like a 3D version of the minecart racing from Donkey Kong Country, with Diddy Kong along for the ride. They are calling it Donkey Kong 64 for now, but say it might be a working title, and it's going to be shown at E3 in Los Angeles in June, so something to look forward to. Borbane. There's a screenshot from Zelda showing Link in some kind of dungeon, and another showing Donkey Kong in a minecart. Classic N64 stuff. Right at the bottom it says February 1999. Yeah, takes me back. This page in N64 Magazine, yeah I remember this issue, must be issue 25 looking at the bottom. Right then, let's have a gander. Taking to know. First up, there's a bit about a new racing game called Beetle Adventure Racing. Seems like they were comparing it to Top Gear Overdrive and San Francisco Rush, racing beetles through shopping malls they reckon. Sounds a bit bonkers but could be a laugh. Then they're banging on about Smash Bros, saying it's going to be out by winter '99. Nintendo's website had said January 21st, so they're thinking it could be out sooner. A bit of excitement there for sure. Resident Evil 64, yeah they were still talking about that, saying it was definitely happening. Apparently, some scenario writer had just finished the story for the N64 version. We were all waiting for that one, wondering how it would shape up on the 64. Down below there's a bit about fanzines, remember those? NAM fanzine. Sounds a bit rough and ready. They call it Wipe Odor of Poor Daisy's Carcass. Charming. It's full of retro game stuff and reviews. You could send off £1.50 for it. Then there's N-Form, another fanzine. They say it's more reviews based than NAM, but with a retro flavor too and all about N64 games. They mention something about Nintendo's top 10 innovations. Sounds like a proper fan effort. Over on the right, it's all about new gear. Thrustmaster RACECPRO steering wheel looks a bit posh. £70 crikey. Apparently Martin liked it because it smells of leather. They reckon it's solid, but not dazzling. 85% they gave it. Then there's the Stingray 64 control pad, cheaper at £20. They reckon it's a bit of a mishmash, good and bad. Nice metallic color and comfy shoulder buttons, but dodgy D-pad and poppy buttons. 61% score, ouch. GameStar G64 steering wheel. This one's cheaper again, they say it smells slightly leathery. Not convinced on that one. It's better than the Thrustmaster in some ways. A grippable wheel and a fuller and smoother turn. 85% again, not bad. Last bit is about Duke Nukem action figures. We like toys here at N64, a lot. Yeah, tell me about it. They're being a bit silly about luminous goo and fart noises. 2 versions of Duke, armed up Night Strike Duke. Sounds like typical Duke nonsense. Alright then, that's the page, bit of everything as usual. This page from Retro World, hosted by Jason Moore, is having a bit of a reminisce about space-themed games, toys and handhelds. There's a bit about some Duke Nukem toys. Apparently they are smashing and festooning the desks at the magazine, which sounds like typical hyperbole. Bandai are bringing out Quake 2 toys as well. Cyborg alien Strogs no less, for anyone interested. Gali. Then there's a section on Zelda collectible action figures. They're not rated as amazing toys because Zelda's dress is a big block of plastic and Link's legs don't move, though Ganon gets a bit more praise for posable limbs. They reckon they are more for collecting than playing with, probably right there. Gear. Moving on to the handheld games, starting with Coleco's Alien Attack, which they say has been popular with collectors for ages. Apparently it's not much to look at, but it uses a color LCD display for a maze-like game. It sounds like a basic but frantic shooter with simple controls. Next up is N-Tech's Space Battle, a tabletop game from '79, trying to replicate arcade thrills. It's described as basic, with just 3 buttons, painted spaceships on the screen, and uses LEDs to show movement and missiles. Sounds rather limited compared to the arcade. Lastly, there's N-Tech's Space Invader, which they reckon is one of the most daring handhelds, basically ripping off Space Invaders. Cheeky. They did a good job apparently of recreating the game, with little blocks for aliens, and simple controls again. They rate it quite highly, as the best LED version of Space Invaders. There's a little retro shop address at the bottom too if anyone fancies a trip to Hendon in London. This page is taking a look at what's coming soon for the N64. Right in the spotlight is Carmageddon, remember that one? It caused a bit of a fuss on the PC back in the day, with all the talk about running over people. Seems for the N64 version they've changed it to zombies, probably to keep Nintendo happy, eh? Still looks like you get points for causing as much damage as possible, and running down the undead. They're saying there are 10 vehicles in total, with some new ones just for the N64, and you can even upgrade your car and fix it up between levels, which sounds pretty useful when you're causing that much mayhem. Apparently there's also a battle mode where you can go head to head with a mate, or the computer, if you're on your own. They reckon if it does well, we might even see a sequel called Carpocalypse. Now, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? They are promising a proper review in a couple of months to see if it's any good. Aside from all the Carmageddon talk, they've also got a little list of other games coming this month, including Battle Tanks, Mario Golf 64, Milo's Astro Lanes, Rayman 2, The Great Escape, Chameleon Twist, Monaco Grand Prix Racing Sim 2, Winback, Snowboard Kids 2, and even Magical Tetris. A bit of a mix of everything, really. There are some screenshots dotted around showing Carmageddon gameplay. Looks as chaotic as you'd expect, with cars smashing into each other. Those were the days when games like this were considered a bit edgy, weren't they? Anyway, it seems they're looking forward to getting their hands on the full version of Carmageddon to give it a proper once-over. This page is all about Battle Tanks on the N64, looking like a bit of alright multiplayer fun, right in time for spring. They're saying it's like Twisted Metal meets Mario Kart Battle Mode, with a dash of GoldenEye tank bits thrown in, which sounds a laugh, doesn't it? Color-coded tanks for easy player ID, which is handy when it gets chaotic. Apparently you get to pick from different tank types, speedy ones, slow bruisers, and general all-rounders, each with their own weapon upgrades like flamethrowers and railguns. They mention a guided missile and even a nuke that flattens buildings like in that Independence Day film, but it sounds like it might take you out too if you're not careful. Everything can get smashed up, buildings and all, which opens up shortcuts, useful for a quick getaway or flanking someone, I suppose. The levels are meant to be bombed out versions of American cities, so nothing too exotic then. It seems multiplayer is where it's at, and they reckon it can get a bit hectic, especially with 4 players on one telly. Probably a squash, but that's how we rolled back then. The reviewer mentions the single player is a bit on the brief side, but the main draw is clearly blasting your mates. They also highlight different viewpoints. Standard turret view, or a third-person one which gives a wider view, might be useful for spotting sneaky players trying to get the drop on you. There's a caption about a special custom tank, with tracks flapping in the wind, and another pointing out you can just blow up buildings for shortcuts. Oh, and a green tank on green tank action. Very descriptive. Somewhere in a bombed out American city apparently. Everyone's happy. Right then. This page shows a bit of a hack and slash section, though it's about golf and bowling, not exactly dungeon crawling, is it? First up is Mario Golf 64, Nintendo sticking Mario into absolutely everything back then, wasn't he? They're saying it arrived just a bit late to make the last issue. Seems fair enough, magazines and deadlines, eh? It's touted as a proper golf game, with characters like Mario, Luigi, Peach, Toadie, and the rest of the Mario Party crew. 6 courses, bit of time attack mode, handicaps for us novice players. Sounds alright if you were into your golf games on console, I suppose. They reckon it's gotta be Shigsy, meaning Miyamoto, and the gang who are behind it. Mario Kart of the Fairways, they're calling it. We'll see about that. Then there's Milo's Astro Lanes, bowling in space, crikey. Interplay are doing this one. It's supposed to be bowling but not like normal 10-pin bowling. Set in space where average blokes would apparently explode. Charming. Milo's Astro Lanes is set in outer space with low pressure and no oxygen, which sounds a bit dramatic for a bowling game, doesn't it? They're talking about space-proof intergalactic types, like Venusian Warbler, Android and Milo Terwillica. The lanes are different to normal ones, with ramps, curves, chicanes, turbo boosts, even power-ups to split the ball, turn it into a boulder, shrink the opponent's ball, that kind of thing. A cross between bowling and crazy golf, they say. Sounds a bit mental, crazy even, as they put it. A review next month apparently. Right then. This page in N64 Magazine, we're having a look at Rayman 2, The Great Escape, or as they've titled it here, Ray Charles. Bit of a cheeky headline there. It's coming from Ubisoft, naturally, and it's for the 64, one-player job, due out in March. Sounds like they're going back to proper platforming, old-school precision jumping, bit like Mario but in 3D, they're saying. Expect lots of quick reactions, tricky jumps, even underwater bits. They seem impressed with the camera system, which is always a worry in 3D platformers, isn't it? Rayman still looks a bit odd without his arms and legs proper like, but they are saying it's got bright effects, so that's something. They're promising a proper review soon. Pam boring to Norsa. Then below that it's Chameleon Twist 2 Sticky End. Sunsoft are doing this one, again on the 64, one player, and out around Feb or March. This one's all about the chameleon's tongue. Flicking it, sticking it, all that business. They're even calling the tongue action therapeutic, whatever that means. Probably just another way of saying it's a bit odd. Apparently there's timed sub-games, and even a gymnastics course, and bowling too from the looks of the screenshot. They reckon this version is better than the preview, but they're a bit miffed the 4-player mode from the first game is missing, and it's apparently quite hard, which seems a bit strange considering it's aimed at the younger players. They do think the chameleon character is cute and sweet, and they mention a parachute on his back and his long twisty tongue. Bit of a mixed bag from the sounds of it. They're reserving judgment until the full review next issue. This page is about a new racing game called Monaco Grand Prix Racing Simulation 2 Feet, coming to the N64 in April from Ubisoft. It's meant to be a proper serious driving game, unlike some of the arcade races we've seen. They're saying it's going to be really realistic, with cockpit views and telemetry and all that, proper simulation stuff. Looking at the screenshots, it does look quite colourful, maybe a bit bright, but they say it's definitely Monaco, so I suppose it is. One of the captions is a bit sarcastic. Is it a race, or is it a traffic jam? Looks tasty, doesn't it? Cheeky! They also point out the smoke trails and flying tyres, saying, strange colour markings there. Wonder what that's about. Another screenshot is of a track with a big Belgium sign. Clever, very subtle. They even joke, recognise this track? Yes, it's Belgium, how did you guess? They reckon the cars are more easily damaged than in F1 World Grand Prix, which could be interesting. And there are going to be hazards on the track, like oil spills, which sounds a bit annoying, to be honest. Apparently you can have up to 4 players, which is decent, but the reviewer hopes the computer AI will be good too. Cheshire. They mention the game doesn't have all the official licenses, so no real drivers, teams or tracks. Bit of a shame that, isn't it? But they hint that the tracks look suspiciously like the real ones anyway. They're wondering if this lack of official blessing might hurt the game, but they are hoping it will be a contender if Ubisoft can get it running smoothly at a good frame rate. Overall, they seem interested to see how it turns out, but not completely blown away just yet. This page in N64 Magazine, right, takes us back to issue 25. We're having a look at a couple of upcoming titles. First up is Win Back. Oddlay is the big headline. Blimey, another stealth game, eh? Seems like everyone was trying to do their own Metal Gear Solid back then. They're saying it's all about sneaky espionage, creeping around, avoiding being seen. Apparently, when the action does kick off, it's supposed to be proper brutal, one shot, and you're down. Sounds a bit tense, doesn't it? The reviewer mentions the graphics might be a bit bland in the screenshots, but hopes Nintendo's code wizards can sort it out. They're banging on about deathmatch mode, saying it looks terrific already, and it's coming out in Japan in the summer, and over here in the autumn. Righto. Then we've got Snowboard Kids 2. sequel to that racer, Snowboard Kids. This one's supposed to have a bit of a story behind it, about this naughty character Sinobin. They're saying it's got strange tracks and weapons, and those big-nosed kids that were in the first one. 10 characters, loads of costumes, and 17 snowboards apparently. Blimey, sounds like they're throwing everything at it. They mention a hidden dragon board, naturally, and multiplayer, cause what's a game without multiplayer these days? Small borders on the multiplayer game, but who cares? Well, quite. All in all, looks like a couple of decent games on the horizon. This page is showcasing Magical Tetris starring Mickey and Donald. Blimey, Capcom jumping on the puzzle bandwagon I see. It's got all the Disney characters plastered all over it. Mickey, Donald, Goofy and Minnie are all there in the character select, looking a bit like their SNES selves to be honest. Looks like your standard Tetris gameplay, but they've chucked in some magic stuff, weird blocks and whatnot, to spice things up. They reckon it's like a head-to-head battle of cuteness. Right then, apparently you can switch off the magic bits if you just want a normal Tetris game, which might be the way to go. They say it's already out in Japan, and coming here soon, full review next month they promise. Borinanu. Then there's a bit called An Ear to the Ground, which is all the little news snippets. Rainbow Six is coming to the N64 from Red Storm. That PC stealth game sounds a bit serious for the N64 if you ask me. Rumor has it there's a game called Mini Racers being made by Intermetrics, a racing game in the Micro Machines style, multiplayer focused. They reckon it might be one of Rare's secret projects, but Nintendo are developing it apparently. NFL Blitz 2000 is getting an update with more teams and stadiums and bone-crunching tackles, can't complain about that. Konami's Survivor Day 1 3D adventure has been shelved. Crystal Dreams nicked the idea they reckon. Tough break for them. Sunsoft's Puma Street Soccer, which they previewed before, looks like it might not even make it to the N64 now, shame that. But Top Gun is back on apparently from both Titus and Microprose, so something for the flight sim fans if there are any on the N64. Doesn't sound like a bad month for news, nothing too earth-shattering though. This page in N64 Magazine is having a bit of a moan about pachinko. Seems Max Everingham, their man in Tokyo, isn't a fan of this Japanese pinball thing, reckons it's a bit senseless and even worse on the N64. Apparently it's like pinball but you just twiddle a knob, and he's even telling a story about some bloke called Fred using funeral money to play it. Bit cheeky that Fred. There's pictures of these pachinko machines, and some folks glued to them. Then there's a bit called Speakeasy, talking about Nintendo redesigning the voice recognition for the N64 controller. They're even bringing out a mic holder. Imaginative name, eh? For the microphone, a plastic grip thing that goes on the controller. If you're really desperate to hear more about Pikachu, on page 66, apparently there's a review there. Lastly, there's a bit called Monstrous, about a new N64 game called Wanagai Monster. It's coming out in December, and it's a monster fighting game with monsters designed by readers of Famitsu Magazine. Blimey, 500 monsters! Developed by Bottom Up, and it's got an adventure mode. Sounds like they reckon it could be a surprise hit. There's a picture of the Famitsu Magazine and a bit of the game. Not sure about the name Wanagai Monster though, a bit of a mouthful. This page is having a look at Shadow Man for the N64, seems like a special investigation type piece. It starts off with a James Bond quip, saying their investigations can take them anywhere, but this time it was only as far as Darlington to check out Iguana UK. Remember Iguana? They did Turok, so you knew they could handle the N64. The article itself is called Come Into My Parlor, and it's all about how Shadow Man is going to be darker and deeper than anything before. There's a bit of a chat with Jason Falkus, who's the director of product development at Iguana. They're talking about the game's gore and horror. Apparently Shadow Man had already got a reputation for being a bit gruesome, and the magazine asks for an example of the gory content. Falkus mentions possessed inmates in the prison level who have been serial killers, and when you get near them their heads explode. Lovely. There's mention of Nintendo being a bit worried about the content at first, but apparently they came around and were supportive, even seeing Shadow Man as a game that could widen the N64's appeal to a more mature audience. It's compared to games like Doom 64, saying that kind of gore is already there. They reckon it's more psychological horror than just gratuitous violence. They're aiming for about a 15 rating, which sounds about right for the time. Hey! There are a few screenshots. One shows a shadowy bloke facing a flying harpy-type creature in a very brown and rocky environment, and the caption says, "Undead harpy beast ahoy! It's probably best to shoot it quickly." Another screenshot shows a slightly weird, almost temple-like building, and a bloke walking towards a dark entrance with the caption, "Hardly the most inviting of entrances, is it?" And there's probably a reason for that. And finally, another one, with a guy standing in a dark room with a hooded figure in the distance, caption reading, "Morning. Oh, there's new one here. Poot." So classic N64 humor, with a dark edge. It all looks pretty moody and atmospheric for the time, definitely trying to push the boundaries a bit on the old Nintendo 64. This page is all about Shadow Man for the N64, looks like a special investigation they're calling it. Right in the middle of the page you've got this imposing image of Shadow Man himself, holding a skull, looking a bit menacing with those shades. There are a couple of screenshots above too, showing some in-game action, looks a bit dark and moody, typical for the time. Apparently Shadow Man is being pushed as really atmospheric, not just mindless gore. Which is a bit of a relief, we had enough of that on the N64, didn't we? They're saying the emphasis is on atmosphere, which sounds promising. There's a bit about the shadow gun being your trustiest ally, and something about holding objects in both hands, which was a big deal back then, proper innovation that was. They mentioned some influences for the look and style, things like Hellraiser, Jacob's Ladder, Seven, and Silence of the Lambs. Bit of a dark bunch, aren't they? And they're throwing in artists like Brogle too. Bit posh for a game magazine, innit? Sounds like they're aiming for something a bit more sophisticated than just run and gun. There's an interview bit where they ask about how much spare time you need to eat up with Shadow Man, and this JF bloke says he'll easily compete with Zelda. Bit of a bold claim, isn't it? He goes on about how they played through a level in an hour finding everything, but then says realistically you won't find everything first time and you'll have to come back later to access new areas. So, sounds like the typical backtracking and collecting stuff, nothing too revolutionary there, but hopefully it's done well. Game's down as being released in May 98 in the UK and US, which is a bit before this magazine in Feb 99, so maybe this is a look back or something. Anyway, Shadow Man looks like it was aiming to be a bit more grown up and atmospheric than your average N64 shooter. We'll have to see if it delivered, won't we? This page from N64 Magazine issue 25, it's having a look at Shadow Man, right in the middle of a special investigation bit. The headline screams slicing, dicing, enticing, which is very much the tone they're going for with this game. Plenty of gore and dark stuff it seems. They're banging on about the literary origins, saying Shadow Man, like Turok, is based on a comic. Apparently some chap called Guy Williams and Simon Phipps took the basic comic story and expanded it for the game. They mention Garth Ennis of Preacher and Hellraiser comic fame was involved in the early comics, which gives you a flavor. Then it's all about the weapons in it. They've got sections on voodoo weapons, flambeau, shadowgun, baton, marteau, asson, calabash, and violator. The voodoo weapons are your standard flesh rippers, only for Shadow Man of course. The flambeau is a torch that chucks fireballs, handy for dark bits apparently. The shadowgun, that's Shadow Man's Desert Eagle version that steals life. The baton is a spear that lets you teleport, bit fancy that. The marteau is a jawbone on a stick that makes shockwaves, lovely. The asson, a fireball skull, sounds charming. The calabash is like a bomb, and the violator is a minigun / nail gun, described as like the Barrett from Final Fantasy VII, but 10 times more impressive. Bit of a claim there, lads. There's a bit about an expansion pack. Apparently Shadow Man will use the 4 MB expansion pack, making Turok 2 look like a PC game. Strong words. They reckon it will look identical to the PC version, and it's going to be a massive 128 megabits cartridge, bigger than Turok 2 and Zelda. Blimey, cartridges were getting big back then. Akaka. The interviewer is chatting to the developers about the levels being non-linear. You can go anywhere, explore. They reckon it's more mature, letting you make your own decisions, not just being guided. Tekka. Then there's a mention of an FBI casebook in the game. Apparently Nettie, the voodoo priestess, has had visions, and a private investigator has compiled FBI profiles on serial killers linked to the apocalypse in the game. You have to piece together clues from these files. Sounds like a bit of extra depth. Jexy. They also talk about creating Shadow Man from scratch, building their own engine. They wanted to make seamless levels with no fogging, proper impressive horizons, which was a big deal at the time. They reckon they've spent 2 years on it. Finally, they ask Iguana UK how they've made what's shaping up to be one of the best games of 1999. The developer Jason Falkus just says because we're making cutting-edge games and we're hardcore gamers. People who love games. Right then, bit cheesy but alright. The interviewer finishes with, amen to that, Mr. Jason Falkus, thank you and good night. Cheeky sod. This page in N64 Magazine has a feature on Shadow Man, which looks like a right gruesome game, very much in the style of the late 90s. They're calling it a serial thriller, and it's all about hunting down these twisted serial killer types. Apparently there are 5 of them, plus some big bad called Legion, who's probably the main villain. It's a third-person game. They reckon it's similar to Tomb Raider, but thankfully the controls are a bit less clunky than old Lara Croft's leaping about. They make a point of saying the controls are pinpoint analog, which sounds like a good thing. Combat-wise, you can use weapons in both hands, which is a bit different, defaulting to the A and B buttons for each arm. They reckon it looks great in action, all very splendid and brutal, with head-removing rusty scythes and massive hammers. Lovely. There's a rumor mentioned that one of the killers is actually based on someone who works at Iguana UK, which is a bit cheeky if true. The screenshots show some pretty grim environments, all spikes and spooky-looking places. One of the captions even jokes about it being a bedroom and fittingly gloomy and dank. Another one is a bit sarcastic about jumping up to a platform, saying, "Reckon you can jump up there, do you?" Well, there doesn't seem to be any other way up. Typical game design back then, eh? Qua. They mention Iguana's previous games, like Turok and Forsaken, so you know they've got pedigree in this sort of thing. Apparently the N64 version is supposed to be the best, with better graphics and a 4-player deathmatch mode compared to the PlayStation and PC versions. Sounds like it could be a decent bit of spooky fun for the N64 if you're into that kind of thing. This page of N64 Magazine writes it's doing a bit of a deep dive into Shadow Man. Seems they're quite impressed with it, calling it pretty terrifying and disturbing, even comparing it to Resident Evil but 10 times better, which is a bold claim. They're going on about naked zombies and rotting corpses, so definitely not one for the younger kids then. Apparently Iguana, the developers, are aiming for the N64 to be identical to the PC version, which is good news. They mention the PlayStation version is a complete pain due to the limitations of the old grey box, which isn't surprising really. There are screenshots of the game, one showing what they call the New York tenement level, looking suitably grim, and another showing a massive cathedral. They reckon it's massive, and from the looks of it they aren't wrong. They're talking about the game's world being seemingly limitless, set in places like Louisiana swampland, and how you need to find this voodoo priestess called Nettie. They mention the draw distance is incredible with no fogging, which for the N64 back then that's a big deal. Most games were a bit foggy to hide the Pope in. And no, gameplay-wise it's packed, they say. Lots of weapons and equipment, including a climbing bracelet to get up bloody waterfalls, literally blood waterfalls apparently. They mention Dark Souls, not like the later games of the same name, mind. These are items you collect to get into coffin gates. A bit like stars in Super Mario 64, that's an odd comparison. The big quest is finding 3 parts of the L'Eclipse dagger to fight these serial killers that are hiding in Liveside and Deadside. You can switch between being Shadow Man and Mike Leroy, and operate in both worlds, which sounds like a clever mechanic. Overall they reckon there's plenty to explore and do, so it sounds like a decent sized game then, which is always welcome. This page then, it's a look at Shadow Man for the N64. It's an N64 special investigation apparently, so they're really digging into it. There are a couple of screenshots, one of a graveyard, looks suitably spooky, and another of an interior which they say is red betinged and beautiful. Right then, they're talking about how the game's areas are altered from Liveside, and you'll find new objects and plenty of beasts waiting to rend you limb from limb. Charming. Apparently there's a character called Jaunty, described as an Irish dwarf Deadside, who's a snake with a skull face and a top hat, guarding the asylum gates. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? Horror. They mention a day/night sequence, which was getting a bit more common by '99, and how there's potential for finding new things at different times of day. Guy Miller, the creative director, reckons they've got the tech to provide a completely awesome world that you can escape to. Always good to hear the hype, isn't it? It's all part of the story in Shadow Man. Then they've got this mastery bit calling Shadow Man, Zelda's evil twin, Super Mario 64's Madwoman in the attic, the rabid, bloodthirsty dark horse of the family. Bit much, isn't it? But it gets your attention, I suppose. They are pushing the dark and mature angle. Apparently, there are about 45 cutscenes in the game, all interacting with the action, explaining plot twists, giving clues, and providing lovely eye candy. Always nice to have a bit of eye candy, eh? They reckon the story is the most important thing, which is what you want to hear, isn't it? Not just a mindless button masher. They mention the gruesome operations in the game and schisms, which involve ripping open chests with something called a retractor, based on surgeons' tools. Lovely. They're definitely going for the mature audience with this one. Look at Iguana UK, who are making it, are hoping for a May release. They're saying it's capable of holding its own, with other forthcoming stunners, like Perfect Dark, Castlevania 64, and Hybrid Heaven. Big claims, but there were some crackers coming out on the N64 around that time, so we'll see if Shadow Man lives up to the hype. They say we should start saving now. Well, cheers for the tip. This page is from an old N64 magazine, and it's part of a future investigation section. It's all about Perfect Dark, which at the time, we were all proper buzzing about, weren't we? Churkle. It's basically a letter from the magazine to Rare, asking about this new game. They're being all polite, saying Dear Rare, asking if they are still making them a new game. Bit cheeky considering GoldenEye was such a massive hit. Pure. The magazine seems pretty keen on Perfect Dark, describing it as a first-person shooter, based on the GoldenEye engine, but set way in the future, 2023 they say, which was ages away back then. They mention it having an X-Files and Blade Runner vibe, which sounded pretty cool. Moody locations, shadowy corporations, alien experiments, all that stuff. And you play as Joanna Dark, a covert operative. Sounds a bit James Bondish but with aliens. They are clearly well up for it because they loved GoldenEye so much, and they're hoping Perfect Dark will be just as good, well perfect, as the title suggests, eh? They even cheekily ask if Rare wants any suggestions for the game. They finish off wishing Rare a happy new year. There are a couple of small screenshots too, showing what looks like in-game bits, some kind of futuristic corridor, and Joanna Dark in action. It all looked very promising at the time, didn't it? Made you think the N64 was going to keep going forever. Oh well. This page comes from an old issue of N64 Magazine. It's all about what readers wanted to see in Perfect Dark, Rare's follow-up to GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. The article's titled, Perfect, and they've compiled a list of the most popular ideas sent in by readers. It's a nostalgic look at what we were all hoping for back then. The list includes things like real-time lighting, a bit more claret because GoldenEye was famously tame due to movie license restrictions, jumping, speech interaction with enemies, and enemies begging for mercy when wounded, which, yeah, that would have been something. There was also multiple routes in levels, deathmatch bots for multiplayer, more realistic injuries, heavier weaponry, and improved AI. It's funny to think back, we wanted quite a bit. Still, Perfect Dark did turn out to be a cracker of a game, didn't it? The next page in this issue of N64 Magazine is all about movie shooters and what Rare might pinch for Perfect Dark. They're looking at the likes of Eraser, Predator, and even the Fifth Element for weapon inspiration. Arnie's railgun, Predator's targeting, and that bonkers gun from the Fifth Element all get a mention. Then there's a section on Quake 2, chatting about how good the deathmatches are, and wondering if Perfect Dark could match it. They think Turok 2 has already nicked some of Quake 2's best bits. Remember trying to link up PlayStations back then? What a pain that was. Ha 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 ha. Finally, there's a collection of readers' thoughts on what they want to see in Perfect Dark. Some of the suggestions are hilarious. One bloke wants Joanna Dark to say, "You're cute, shame I'm about to kill you." And another wants shots to the groin to be far more horrific. Good times. The next page features a special investigation into what gamers wanted to see in upcoming N64 titles, focusing on Half-Life, Trespasser, and Perfect Dark. Half-Life was a revelation at the time. The reviewer notes how immersive it was compared to other shooters, with its seamless world, and how realistic item placement would be a great addition to Perfect Dark. Trespasser was a bit of a novelty, but the reviewer praises its innovative physics and interaction system. They do wonder how feasible it would be on the N64, given its technical demands. The idea of seeing your character's body and customizing outfits in Perfect Dark gets a mention. There are snippets of reader suggestions, ranging from scoring systems for headshots, to enemies hesitating before shooting a sexy woman. Oh, the 90s. Someone even suggests celebrities in deathmatch mode, playing as Grace Jones with a realistic cuboid head. Other reader suggestions include comments that include a ventilation level, seeing your legs if you look down, visible body armor, unique enemy reactions. There is also a comment about enemies with robotic movement like a robot in a film. It all sounds a bit mental. Lastly, the magazine staff promised to send all the best ideas to Rare, cheekily suggesting that if we see anything strangely familiar in Perfect Dark, we'll know where it came from. This page is the cover of an issue of N64 Arena magazine, featuring Star Wars Rogue Squadron. The magazine is touting it as the best Star Wars game ever, promising a massive review to back up the claim. The magazine's guide to scoring is also highlighted. They only give out their Star Game medal if they've played the game thoroughly. They rate games from 85% and above, down to 19% 0%, with descriptions of what each score range means in terms of the game's quality and whether it's worth buying. A score of 70% means that the game is jolly good fun and well worth thinking about adding to your collection. The next page here, it's all about the N64 games that were doing the rounds back in '99. We kick off with a look at South Park, SWE-artastic shooty stuff according to the magazine, with Kenny featured on the page. Then there's Center Court Tennis, Penny Racers, which they reckon is a rubbish Micro Machines clone. Ouch, a little harsh maybe? There's a section for Import Arena, with a little Koopa Trooper waving an American flag. Other games mentioned on the page include Mario Party, Nightmare Creatures, Kirato Kaiketsu, and Pikachu Genki Detchu. There's a How It Works section explaining the rating categories: visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. A Team 64 inches panel provides mini-reviews of games from various contributors, like James Ashton, who played Pikachu, Will Overton, who played Mario Party, Tim Weaver Rogue Squadron, Martin Kitt South Park, and Justin Webb Centra Court Tennis. There's a lot of trash talk. Other reviewers include Paul Edwards Penny Racers, Andrea Ball South Park, Jess Bickham Micro Machines, Mark Green South Park, and James Price Pikachu. It's quite the mix of opinions back in those days. The next page features Star Wars Rogue Squadron for the Nintendo 64, back when the N64 was still the console to have. It's got a big write-up, promising it could be the best Star Wars console game, a bold claim back then. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed about it, especially comparing it to Shadows of the Empire, which, yeah, had that great Battle of Hoth level, but the rest was a bit pants, wasn't it? They mention the analog stick making for fab flying. There are screenshots of YW wings, speeders and other stuff from the game, and they also give a nod to previous coverage of Rogue Squadron Future Look in N64 20 seconds. The review also mentions the 15 flying missions. It's out now according to the page, with details about the LucasArts game, including that it needs 128 M, supports between 1 and 4 players, an expansion pack, a rumble pack, and a cartridge backup. It's also priced at £50. This page is all about Star Wars Rogue Squadron on the N64, a bit of a look at one of the missions, Search and Destroy. It dives into the Rogue Squadron story, set between The Empire Strikes Back and the original Star Wars, filling us in on Luke Skywalker forming Rogue Squadron after the Battle of Yavin. Apparently Wedge Antilles, Zev Seneska, Dak Ralter and Wes Jansen are in it. Basically they are trying to foil the Empire's plans. The mission we're talking about is based on the second planet. You have to seek out and stop Imperial TIE bombers. They don't really care too much about dying. Back in '99, Rogue Squadron was pretty impressive on the N64, a solid space shooter that looked pretty good at the time. It's interesting to read the magazine's take on it then, compared to how we see it now. This page from N64 Magazine, probably around 1999 by the looks of it. It's all about Star Wars Rogue Squadron. That was a cracker. I remember getting the expansion pack. As they mentioned, it really did sharpen up those graphics. Before it was all a bit muddy, wasn't it? And the fog. Oh god, the fog. The page focuses on a particular mission, Protection, where you've got to keep a rebel shuttle safe. 3 lives and no continues. They were tough on us back then, weren't they? The review gives some tips on how to survive, like keeping an eye on the missile turrets, heat-seeking missiles, nasty stuff indeed, and finding the force field generator. There's also a little Rogues Gallery section, talking about the XWing and YWing. I always preferred the XWing, myself, fast and sleek, just like they say. The Y-wing was alright, but a bit of a tank really. Still, 20 bombs, can't argue with that. It mentions rescuing Wedge Antilles in one of the missions, and that was a good time. Back to HQ for tea and biscuits, fantastic. The next page covers Star Wars Rogue Squadron on the N64. Rogue Squadron. A proper blast from the past. It was a decent game back then, wasn't it? The page has a few screenshots showing off the gameplay, with tips on how to take down ATSTs and other Imperial nuisances. It mentions using the Z button to slow down, something I'd completely forgotten about. They also talk about the Millennium Falcon being available after completing the game, but say it's a bit useless, which is a fair comment. There's also a bit about the AWing and VWing. The reviewer seems a bit down on the VWing, calling it a dump, and mentioning it gets swallowed up by passing Imperial fighters. Ouch! Still, Rogue Squadron was a decent addition to the N64 lineup at the time, even if the VWing wasn't up to much. The next page kicks off with a right moan about the Liberation of Gerard V level in Rogue Squadron. Reckons it's a contender for the worst level of all time. Apparently you're trying to protect Y-wings from missile turrets and it's just a proper pain in the backside. Sounds like a frustrating experience. Then it moves on to talk about the different mission types in Rogue Squadron, focusing on reconnaissance. The game looks great, and they've crammed in loads of locations like Tatooine and Kessel. The graphics are sharp, especially compared to Shadows of the Empire on the N64, which they diss. There's mention of blasting TIE fighters, ATSTs, AT-ATs, and even speeder bikes. The Rogues Gallery section highlights the speeder, used for similar purposes as in Empire Strikes Back, especially during the defection at Corellia mission. Overall, Rogue Squadron gets a good review. It's a healthy marriage of search and destroy, reconnaissance and protection episodes. It's a top game, but the control is not quite as smooth as the PC version, which is unforgivable. The amount of freedom, when compared to SOTE, is like The next page of this old N64 magazine is all about Star Wars: Rogue Squadron, a game that, back in February 1999, was quite the looker on the N64. The review is generally positive, giving it an 85% score. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, points out the impressive visuals for the time, intricate and precise, though let down by some fogging. He praises the sound design, saying you could pinpoint enemies even when they were off-screen. Mastery and lifespan get an 8 each, and the reviewer felt it wasn't the greatest Star Wars game ever, but a fun slice of Lucas-inspired action. There are a few screenshots dotted around, showing off the in-game graphics. The reviewer pokes fun at the YWing sound effects not quite matching the films, and notes some disappointing background details. The main objective is to collect challenge points shaped like medals, earning bronze, silver, or gold for taking out enemies. If you collect all bronze medals, you get to pilot Luke Skywalker around Beggar's Canyon. The review mentions a few flaws, such as some unhelpful co-pilots and a sluggish pace, even comparing the X-Wing to an Austin Montego. The lack of briefing for some missions and random crashes are also highlighted. There is mention of some of the N64 office were struggling with the liberation of Gerard Vith, so it sounds like it was a tough game at the time. The next page features a review of the N64 South Park game. Now this takes me back. Remember when South Park first hit our screens? Mad, isn't it? Henda. The article starts off with the usual hyperbole, suggesting everyone's been gagging for this game. They even suggest this game will be at the top of the N64 charts, but Zelda is more common on the shelves of Dixon's. I don't know if I agree. Warrington. There are screenshots from the game, featuring those blocky N64 graphics, and captions such as urine is guaranteed to screw up any robot's insides, and, or, how sweet, he's waving to you, kill him now, which is just classic South Park humor, isn't it? The review does mention that it's built on the Turok 2 engine, which is alright I suppose, but they say it began to smack of a rush job, and cash-in. They mention that regular readers of N64 Magazine will have already seen their review of the American version, so they will be turning the page with a heavy heart. Finally, at the bottom there is a cartoon drawing of Kenny, reading a book named Sabrina Bound to Love. Well, they certainly knew their audience. This page, well, it's a spread from an N64 magazine, taking a look at the South Park game on the Nintendo 64. The headline screams, "You will respect my authority," which is very South Park in it. It's all about the weapons you can use in the game, like the Warpo Ray which shoots fish, the Sponge Dart Gun, and even snowballs, all powered up with a tap of the D-pad. They say you'll pay a price for using them though, as each shot eats up ammo. There's a sniper chicken, apparently essential for the final boss, and something called the Terrence and Philip doll. These Canadian blokes apparently pack a powerful fart. Yeah, right, indeed, as the reviewer states. Down at the bottom we've got the South Park kids themselves, Stan, Kyle and Cartman, all reading Sabrina books. There's the Adrian Encounter, Sabrina Unchained, and the Seduction Chamber. It's February 1999 apparently. The next page is from N64 Magazine, looking at South Park on the N64. Remember that one? I wasn't exactly blown away, to be honest. The mag's doing a guide to some of the levels, specifically Episode 4 Stage 3 and Episode 5 Stage 2, giving tips on how to get through them, fall onto the semi-hidden ledge, find the Warpo Ray, defeat those laser-firing robots, dodgeball the RC cars, and snipe that chicken. It all sounds a bit P-ball, repetitive now, doesn't it? Key-ball. There's a section on multiplayer, and the reviewer seems a bit disappointed, reckons the weapons are slow and unsatisfying. The characters section mentions Terrence and Philip, saying they found them shouting, "I fart on your grave." Funny. Simpler times. In the arenas section they say the hill level is the best, and the UFO core is rubbish because it makes hitting other players difficult. They also highlight that the weapons from the single-player game are just lying around waiting to be picked up. The alien dancing gizmo is apparently amusing, remember that? You'd aim it at a friend and watch them start jiving to a crackly old 1930-style record. Finally, there's a tactics section, advising you to locate the cow launcher and remember the positions of the health-restoring snacky cakes. The next page is a look at the N64 game South Park. It's a screenshot-heavy preview, guiding you through the basics of the gameplay. Looks like the reviewer's having a bit of fun with it, what with the cheeky captions and all, not entirely convinced this is a top-tier game. They talk about farting on characters to get them out of the way, and using the sniper chicken against tanks, so it's not all serious game analysis. You had to love the humor of South Park back in the day. Still, was this a game adults would really want to play, or was it for kids? A fair amount of text talks about the levels not being difficult, but if you fail, you have to play a bonus game where the tanks are smashing up South Park and you have to stop them, which I guess is kind of fun and frantic. The preview mentions weapons lying around like Terrence and Philip dolls to chuck at enemies. Sounds like a bit of mindless fun, to be honest. The next page features a review of South Park on the N64. Back in the day, everyone was raving about the show, so naturally, there was a game tie-in. The reviewer kicks things off by saying how well the characters and their catchphrases have been squeezed onto the cartridge, and how impressive it looks and sounds. The review mentions, Cartman, Stan, Kyle and Kenny are all rendered in 3D, bobbing their heads. But it soon takes a turn. The gameplay is pretty basic, a simple first-person shooter. You just end up walking backwards shooting at waves of enemies like crazed turkeys and brown-feathered birdies. The reviewer highlights the lack of variety in enemies, mentioning robots and manic cows as company. The multiplayer is a mixed bag. Apparently it's fun, because each character has unique animations and samples. Warrington, the final verdict is pretty lukewarm. It's just funny enough and chock full of samples that South Park addicts should be satisfied. The reviewer, James Ashton, ends by saying that it beats sitting on the sofa stuffing cheesy poofs into your mouth all day. The next page features a review of South Park on the Nintendo 64. The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed, giving it a 73% rating. It's described as a fairly monotonous first-person shooter, but they admit the South Park charm rubs off on it well. The review touches on the boss battles, saying they aren't too difficult if you know the right moves, and recommends circling tactics. The sniper chicken weapon gets a shout-out for being fast and accurate. Graphically, the reviewer notes the characters and cutscenes are fine, but there's perhaps too much snow and mist. The sound, however, gets high praise for being laugh-out-loud funny. In terms of how it stacks up, the reviewer mentions Turok 2, which reached new heights, questioning what's gone wrong since. They note the game lacks enough levels and variety. There are a few screenshots scattered around the page showing different aspects of the game. One shows a giant turkey silhouetted against the night sky, another shows what happens when you defeat a boss chicken breast portions. There is a screenshot of Mr. Hat in a robot, and a screenshot of what the inside of the spaceship is, where you confront the evil aliens. This page features Micro Machines 64 Turbo, Codemaster's top-down racer. The review starts with some humor about shrinking down and racing around breakfast tables. The screenshots show some gameplay, racing around tables avoiding peas and carrots, and a brief section on some dune buggy action. It notes that it's a pretty faithful conversion of Micro Machines V3, from the PlayStation and PC at the time, that we'd all already seen on PlayStation. It mentions the game has 48 tracks, from breakfast tables to school desks, and 32 vehicles from sports cars to powerboats. The next page features a review of Micro Machines 64 Turbo. I remember this game. It was alright, nothing groundbreaking. The review is titled, Swiss Tony's Car Exchange Deals on Wheels, which is a bit of a weird reference, even for back then. The reviewer talks about winning prize cars and betting them against mates, which was a decent enough gimmick. They mention a VW Beetle, hovercraft, and a six-wheeled tank thing as examples of cars you could win, and that the 32 vehicle choices are loads. They do mention that they'd have liked more N64 specific stuff. Back in '99, we were all hoping for the N64 to really come into its own. The reviewer reminisces about the impossible Tedder-control helicopters from the SNES and Mega Drive Micro Machines 2, which is fair enough. The review also highlights the multiplayer, claiming you can have up to 4 players with 1 joypad each, or even 8 if you share. Sounds like a right laugh if a bit chaotic. The reviewer also touches on the power-ups, mentioning force fields, mines, rockets, and spring-loaded claws, which all sounds pretty standard for a Micro Machines game. They do concede that they'd still rather play Mario Kart or F-Zero X, which is a pretty damning indictment, to be honest. The verdict is that it's a good game, but perhaps not as essential as it might have been a couple of years prior. They give it a score of 86%, saying it's simple, furious racing fun, and includes 8 for visuals, 5 for sounds, 7 for mastery, and 8 for lifespan. The next page features a review of Center Court Tennis on the Nintendo 64. The reviewer reckons it's a decent enough tennis game, especially for multiplayer, but it's no Smash Tennis on the SNES, or Super Tennis. He mentions the graphics are reminiscent of Smash Tennis, and the sounds feature Japanese keyboard trumpets, whatever that means. The game gets a middling score of 67%. He criticizes the lack of variation in moves, shot compliance, and random computer play. The reviewer notes the abundance of features, including a player creator, and that the smash zooms across the court with a rainbow trail. He concludes, Centra Court Tennis is a passable, cheerful, but ultimately poor man's Super Tennis. The next page is a review of Penny Racers on the N64. I remember this one, or at least, I remember seeing it in the shops. The The reviewer wasn't too impressed, giving it a mediocre 58%. They reckon it's a bit of a letdown, especially compared to Mario Kart. They highlight the visual are boxy and bland, the sounds are boring, and only fun for Lego building types. Yeah. The review mentions you can customize your cars, but it's a slow process, and even the track editor isn't up to much, because you can't change the backgrounds. There are some screenshots showing the gameplay, and they also mention the Japanese version, Choro Q, which they reviewed earlier and also didn't rate that highly at the time. The next page is a look back at Mario Party on the Nintendo 64. Seems we're delving into the import arena section, focusing on games that were initially only available in Japan or America. There are screenshots of Mario Party, with little callouts describing the gameplay and the characters, such as a player controlling Toad dealing with Bowser, and another showing Luigi moving spaces on Mario's board. There's also a board, featuring the Mario Bros, Princess Peach, and some ghosts. It mentions a previous look at Mario Party in issue 24. I can't wait to see what was discussed then, as it's good to see the title getting continued coverage. The article then highlights the star performers in the game, Mario, Wario, Yoshi and Donkey Kong, with little snippets about their roles, with reviews from the N64 team. Yoshi is a choice that is always happy, and Donkey Kong is always shouting. There's an acknowledgement that some of the minigames in Mario Party look a bit like SNES games, what with them being 2D. Button mashing your way to victory is a common theme in the minigames. There's a healthy mixture of 2D and 3D in Mario Party. Good times indeed. The next page features a review of Mario Party on the N64. The reviewer starts with a bit of a confession. They haven't actually finished the game, but explains it's a game that is not really meant to be finished. They compare it to Bewitched, that one-hit wonder that seemed to go on forever. They mention you had to collect 20 coins to get a star in a previous preview, but that turns out to be incorrect. The reviewer paints a picture of a typical Boxing Day scene, family stuffed with Christmas leftovers, and suggests Mario Party is an ideal game to put some fun back into board gaming. The visuals are described as being similar to Yoshi's Story, presented in 2D, with the aim being to replace the traditional board game experience. There's a screenshot showing a starting area with Yoshi, Mario, Luigi, Princess Peach and a Koopa Troopa, and a comment that it's drug-free but addiction is guaranteed. FK. The bottom of the page has a table confirming it's out in Japan, due to be released in the UK in spring. It's 64 megabytes in size, supports between 1 and 4 players, supports controller packs and rumble packs, and the price is 7,900 yen, roughly £40. The next page from N64 Magazine features a review of Mario Party. I remember this game well. It starts with Meet the Folks, an introduction to the reviewers, including a 2.5-year-old, which is a bit of a laugh. They mention the memorable scenes and screaming in unison. The review compares Mario Party to a board game, with Honda CBR 900 Fireblade level energy. They touch on the lush and cunning board spaces, and the extremely irritating manner things can happen. They had to deal with Donkey Kong's Jungle Land on 3 occasions. They dive into minigames being the core of the experience. The intro screen shows characters waiting, and hitting a button reveals the action. The essence of Mario Party lies in minigames, although some are better than others. There's a section called Welcome Happy Minigames, and then a review of the best: Koopa Balloons, Sumoguri Mario, Bull Riding, UFO Catcher, Mini Mario Kart, Bowling and Dangerous Race. They briefly describe each of these games. There is also a screenshot of Yoshi's Tropical Island board, and some comments. The next page features a review of Mario Party on the Nintendo 64, giving it a solid 80%. The reviewer, Max Everingham, reckons it's a proper laugh, even if you lose a few mates in the process. He praises the game's ability to draw players in and create a genuinely fun experience. Even if it doesn't push the N64 hardware to its limits, it relies on the Nintendo's imaginative nonconformism. The page includes screenshots showcasing the board game aspect and minigames. We see Toad offering hairstyling advice, coins to collect, and the promise of UFO catchers. There are also comments on the English-Japanese accessibility of the game, its visuals which are better than a Monopoly board, and the plinkety-plonk sounds. A fun-size section breaks down the minigame types: 24 four-way battles, 10 1-vs-3 scenarios, 5 TW-overs-2 games, and 11 single-player games. The next page is a look at Nightmare Creatures on the N64. Remember that one? It was billed as being pretty gory, The review kicks off with a bit about how the game is overflowing with blood and guts, almost as if to address the N64's reputation for being a bit sanitized compared to the PlayStation, which it kind of was. The reviewer mentions you can dismember your way through hordes of creatures in Victorian London as Father Ignatius and his foxy sidekick Nadia. They're not wrong. There is mention of various ways to dispatch enemies, including a samurai sword. There's a Nightmare Creatures fact box, saying it's out now in the States but TBA for us here in the UK, and will set you back about $50, which was roughly £35 back then. It uses the expansion pack and controller pack day. There's a brief moan about the camera and adrenaline meter, which they are calling cardiac arrest. It's not all that rosy though, as they mention it looks almost exactly like the PlayStation version, right down to dodgy lighting and fog effects though, which is a bit of a backhanded compliment. The next page features an import arena review of Nightmare Creatures on the N64. The reviewer, Martin Kitts, isn't exactly singing its praises. He notes the game's PlayStation-era control scheme, which feels clunky, particularly the analog stick implementation. He also mentions the level design being linear, and the camera being a right pain, leading to cheap deaths. Visually, it's a bit rough around the edges, but not too bad if you can ignore the jumpy camera work. The sound design gets a slightly more positive nod, described as subquake rumbles and groans. The overall verdict isn't great, a 57% score. Kitts concludes that while this sort of thing might have been welcome on the N64 a while back, things have moved on. There are some screenshots showing off the typical gloomy environments, and some of the beasties you'll be facing. One amusing caption declares a zombie's head as government property. This page from N64 Magazine features Kirato Kaiketsu, 64 Tantaidan from Imagineer. The reviewer kicks things off by comparing buying it to when your auntie buys a top-end computer, just to write letters, or when your granddad gets a fancy car to pop down to the shops and buy his tobacco. The review says setting the game up is a chore, and there's a lot of text to wade through. Graphically, it's colorful, in that manga style that was all the rage, but nothing that's pushing the N64 hardware. The review compares it to Mario Party, but claims it is much thinner. With no English translation, it will be tough for us non-Japanese speakers to play it, and is likely to end up as a difficult quiz question. The game gets a 60% score. There are screenshots of the game, showing characters on a board and what seems to be the battle system, and a section about the many decisions available in the game. Choices include retrieving a lost item, bomb removal, and letting the CPU select for you. Also, there is a mention of item cards like Stealth Bomber, Breakball, Stun Gun, Grip Shoes, and Manipulator cards. This page features a look at Pikachu Genki Dechu for the N64. It seems like it was quite a novel idea at the time, using the voice recognition unit. I remember reading about it in the mag back then, thinking it was a bit of a gimmick. It's hard to imagine Pikachu responding to your voice commands back in the day, but the reviewer seems impressed by it. The screenshots show Pikachu interacting with other Pokemon, looking a bit rough after a night out, and having conversations. The game info box states it was out in Japan, and there was a TBA for the UK, so it was an import title. The reviewer remarks on the sound design, saying Pikachu's speech is endearing and elicits giggles and blubs. I can imagine it might grate after a while. The page also mentions the gameplay involves befriending Pikachu, exploring his world, and training him to respond to your voice. It all sounds a bit like Nintendogs, but with a Pokemon twist. The next page comes from N64 Magazine and dives into Pikachu Genki Dechu, a Japanese exclusive at the time. The article is titled Import Arena, and it's all about this quirky game where you interact with Pikachu using your voice. Remember the microphone pack? What a cool piece of kit that was, even if it looked a bit daft. The reviewer talks about how the game opens with a smart cutscene, and how you coach Pikachu through various activities by speaking to him. They mention activities like babysitting caterpillars, collecting food, playing ball, and even going on a fishing trip. It sounds like a lot of repetition is involved. The page notes that the game's visuals are simple but effective, and the sound is decent. The reviewer praises the voice recognition system as being a little marvel, but criticizes the controls for moving around. There is also some mention of the accessibility of the game and the difficulty, including that a Japanese-English dictionary is recommended for those outside of Japan. They give the game a verdict score of 75%, stating that it's a bold step and that Pikachu really does respond to your voice like a real pet. Overall, the reviewer seems impressed with Pikachu Genki Dechu, praising Nintendo for trying something different and imaginative, even though they are aware it may not be to everyone's taste, especially in the West. This page is a right blast from the past. In it, It's the cover of Club 64, and it's all about Nintendo 64, the greatest console ever. The main feature this month is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which they're promising to give you the lowdown on all the weapons and gear, which, let's be honest, we all needed a bit of help with back then. They've also got the usual Club 64 mailbox answering readers' questions, a how-to section giving guides for games like Zelda and Turok 2, and Tips Extra with cheats and tips. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is there to solve your gaming problems, for anyone who bought into that sort of thing. There's a Nintendo hotline for insider hints, a competition to win some goodies, and the I'm the Best section showing off league tables. Skill Club 64 is also featured, boasting about their tough gaming competition. And of course, a contact section to find pen pals, which, was a thing back then. Plus a directory with reviews of every N64 game ever, quite a handy guide. Back issues and subscriptions are being advertised for the magazine itself, and the cover of the magazine featured includes reviews for Rogue Squadron, Mario Party, and Shadow Man. Good times? Ario. This page from Club 64, it's the mailbox section, where readers get to sound off. Aaron from Bristol kicks things off by winning the star letter, with his thoughts on Banjo-Kazooie. He says it's the only decent game he's got at the moment, and sends in some t-shirts. The magazine jokes about whether the shirts have been washed. There's a correction corner, dealing with reader nitpicks, like someone pointing out that you ride a Styracosaurus, not a Triceratops, in Turok 2, and, well, we all knew that, right? Another reader corrects a mistake in the Legend of Zelda review. Thomas from Newport gets a mention for spotting that. They also poke fun at someone for spelling Freezy Peak wrong in N64 23rds, calling it Freezy Park amateurs. Andrea from Sheffield writes in about spotting N64 Magazine for sale in Mexico, which is apparently impressive. Greg from Top Secret Bunker talks about getting over 100% accuracy in GoldenEye by shooting through enemies, and they reckon 600% is possible, which is pretty good going, right? Daniel from Oxford sent in some cool pictures of people with computer screens on their heads, but they were pretty bad. Alex from Grimsby writes in about his little brother doing jobs for pocket money to buy the magazine, like retrieving a chain from the toilet for a $5. The magazine jokes that it doesn't seem enough. The next page, alright, it's the Club 64 mailbox section, bit of reader feedback and dreams for the future. First up, there's a bit about celebrity lookalikes. Seems readers were spotting famous faces in the N64 team, and some reader named Sam Walker suggesting they looked like Martin Clunes and Pamela Anderson. Then there's a moan about buying games, someone complaining about the Christmas rush, and how Silicon Valley and Body Harvest got overshadowed by Zelda 64 and Turok 2. To be fair, they had a point, didn't they? Zelda was massive. Turok 2, it must have been tough launching anything against those two behemoths. The writer mentions Banjo-Kazooie and Mystical Ninja as highlights from that year. Quality games, those were. I enjoyed those. There's also a snippet about finding a signed Berry poster in Banjo-Kazooie in Rusty Bucket Bay, a bit of a deep-cut reference to the cancelled 12 Tales Conquer. Finally, there's the Dream On section, with a reader suggesting a school-based RPG where you meet historical figures, and the editor's reply is typically sarcastic. Seems like a weird idea, mixing Henry V 2i with a jet plane. Madness. The next page features the Mailbox Club bonus letters, where readers share their thoughts and questions. One reader notes similarities between Holy Magic Century and Zelda 64, pointing out the shared name Epona for Link's horse. Also, the reader notes a reference to elves in Kokiri Forest called the Kobold, while in Holy Magic Century's first forest stage, there's a type of Power Rangers-style monster, also called the Kobold. Another reader wonders if playing too much N64 is affecting their reality when they find themselves humming N64 tunes. Matthew Pryor jokes about CCTV cameras and side effects from Turok 2. The So Tell Me This section answers reader questions. One asks about the Xenia, warrior princess game, which sadly seems stuck in development hell. Another asks about Shadow Man's similarities to Resident Evil, and the release of Mission Impossible 2, and if there are any plans for 1080 Degrees 2, and DKR 2. Alex Casey is told to expect development issues in the future. Rare is busy with Jet Force Gemini, Conker 64, Perfect Dark, and Donkey Kong 64, as well as a new serious racing game. Kirk Salisbury inquires about rugby league games on the N64, which seems unlikely. Paul Murphy asks if ISS 98 is worth buying if they own ISS 64, to which they say it is, as there's new moves, more teams, and improved commentary. The next page showcases the Mailbox Club 64 inches section, where readers share their opinions on N64 games. It's titled, Right You Are, and encourages readers to send in reviews. First up is GoldenEye 007, with a reader expressing disappointment, stating that it looks good and sounds good, but the cheats are too hard to get, and the zero agent mode is impossible, giving it a score of 78%. They also find the multiplayer boring. Next, there's a review of Iggy's Wrecking Balls, in which the reviewer scored it 92%. Despite N64 Magazine scoring it badly in issue 19, the reviewer thinks it's a much better game. WCW vs NWO World Tour gets an 82% from a reader who claims it's a must-run for multiplayer, though the single-player mode feels tacked on, but forgivable when you've got 3 mates playing. Finally, Mario 64 gets a glowing 99% from a reader who calls it the best 3D platformer and takes a jab at Banjo-Kazooie. At the bottom, there's an invitation to send in your own reviews to N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12BW. The next page shows a feature from N64 Magazine with tips on how to get all the weapons in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. There's a screenshot of the game, and they've given it a stonking 98% score. Ocarina of Time was groundbreaking back then, but a peerless example of Nintendo doing what they do best. Bit much in it? There's a What We Said blurb, referencing their previous reviews in issues 23 and 24. This page is a feature from Club 64. It's a how-to guide to getting all the weapons and equipment in Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The author, Jez Bickham, jokes that it would take 87 years to find everything in the game. Blimey, that's a bit strong, even if Ocarina was a bit of a maze sometimes. Still, I suppose they were trying to be helpful, giving us a head start so we were prepared to face Ganon. Pava. This page is from N64 Magazine, issue 25, back in the day. The main focus here is a weaponry guide for The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. It details how to find and use various weapons and items in the game, like bombs for blasting open secret areas and taking out those pesky dodongos. They mention the fairy slingshot, the boomerang for hitting unreachable switches, and the fairy bow for shooting from a distance. Of course, there's also the fire arrows and light arrows, those truly wondrous things needed to take on Ganon at the end. They even talk about the ice arrows from the Gerudo training ground, kicking ice, as they put it, with a bit of British wit. It's all pretty standard stuff for a guide at the time, but it's fun to look back and remember scouring these pages for tips and tricks. The next page, Right, this is a double-page spread from what looks like N64 Magazine, going by the Club 64 inches branding. It's a how-to guide to getting all the weapons and equipment in Zelda 64, which we all know as Ocarina of Time. A bloody masterpiece if you ask me. They've got sections dedicated to specific items. First up is the Bomb Chew, those little explosive mice you could buy after dark. Nifty for hitting auto for each targets, weren't they? Then there's the Megaton Hammer, found in the Fire Temple. Great for dealing with Volvagia, that fiery dragon. Paisei. Of course, the Master Sword gets a mention. You had to pull it from the stone, after collecting the spiritual stones. They're not wrong. Once you could pull off that spin attack easy peasy, you were practically in heaven. They also feature the hookshot and longshot, essential for climbing and bridging gaps, especially in the Water Temple. And finally, the Giant's Knife, a two-handed sword you could get from a Goron for 200 rupees, twice as powerful as the Master Sword but breaks easily, still good for killing things at the time when you need them. The next page, Right, let's have a gander. It's all about snagging those essential bits and bobs in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. You know, the stuff you need to actually finish the ruddy game. The usual suspects are here. The ocarinas, obviously, for warping about and summoning Epona. Then there's the silver gauntlets for shifting heavy blocks, the Zora tunic for a bit of underwater exploring, and the trusty Hylian shield for not getting your backside kicked by those pesky big-toothed monsters. Oh, and the Lens of Truth, essential for getting through the Shadow Temple without, well, falling to your doom. There's a bit about great fairy gifts, particularly Nairu's Love, a lifesaver against those iron knuckles, and Din's Fire, a rather satisfying way of dealing with a crowd of enemies. Finally, there's the gold gauntlets, the ultimate power-up for shifting the biggest blocks in Ganon's tower. Looking back, it's easy to take these things for granted, but at the time, finding each of these items felt like a proper achievement. Good times, The next page, Right, let's have a gander. Dun. It looks like we're having a look at Club 64, how to get all the weapons and equipment in Zelda 64. Ocarina of Time, what a game that was. This must have been late in its life, when everyone was trying to get 100%. So Ferori's Wind can be grabbed in Zora's Domain, and the spin attack from the fairy at Death Mountain. There's also info on increasing your magic, finding the iron boots in the ice cavern, nabbing the Goron tunic, good for not getting roasted alive, you see. The hover boots can be found in the Shadow Temple, and of course the mirror shield, for reflecting light and beating Twin Rover. It also mentions the Stone of Agony, for finding hidden secrets. Yeah, those were the days, figuring out all those secrets. The next page is from an old issue of N64 Magazine, probably from around '99, judging by the feel of it. It's a how-to guide, showing how to get Bigoron's sword in the Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. The guide is broken down into 4 steps, each with screenshots from the game. First, you need to get the pocket egg from the Kuko lady in Kakariko village and hatch it. Then you use the Kuko to wake up Talon, and return the blue Kuko to the girl, who gives you Kohido. You then need to take Kojiro to the Kuko woman's brother in the Lost Woods, who is sat looking forlorn. He gives you a mushroom to take back to the potion shop in Kakariko. From there you take the potion from the potion maker lady to the Kokiri girl, that says people that are in the Lost Woods too long turn into Stalfos, and she gives you the poacher's saw. It's a complicated old trading sequence, alright. But hey, Bigoron's sword was pretty powerful back then, twice the damage of the Master Sword, you know. The next page is a walkthrough on how to get Bigoron's sword in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Good memories, that game. I remember getting it for Christmas that year, one of my favorite games ever. Gebera is broken down into 8 steps, starting with obtaining the poacher's saw from the head carpenter in Gerudo Valley, then taking a broken Goron sword to Bigoron atop Death Mountain. After that, you need to fetch some eye drops from King Zora by giving him the eyeball frog, and then deliver them back to Bigoron. He then gives you a claim check for the sword. After a few in-game days, you return with the claim check to get the Bigoron sword. There's also a section teasing lots more Zelda content coming in future issues of the magazine, including readers' Zelda tips and a chance to share your favorite bits of Ocarina of Time. Finally, it asks readers to create their own Ocarina melodies and send them in for a prize, which I remember being quite good actually. The next page writes an article from N64 Magazine, issue 25. The title screams, "How to Save the Universe in Turok," in massive letters. It's all about Turok 2, Seeds of Evil. There's a little What We Said box, and it mentions the review from issue 21. Tim, the reviewer, reckoned Turok 2 was a thrilling new era for the N64. Bigger and bolder and the best game of the year so far. Pretty high praise, and the game got a 95% rating, which, back then, was pretty rare. The main article is about helping players get through the one-player mode and master the multiplayer. It mentions tricks and surprises, from the opening 4 levels and finishing the job off in the other 2. The page also lists a load of stuff, like power generators, ion capacitors, weapons, level keys, warp portals, warp portal activator, primogen keys, alien embryos, assembly plant 1, crystal boss, satchel charges, eagle feather, force field generator, assembly plant 2, master computer, primogen boss generator 4, and power cells. This page is a how-to guide for Turok 2, Seeds of Evil. Looks like part 2 of the guide by Daniel Glenfield. Remember Turok 2? That game was pretty ambitious for the N64, eh? The page has some tips on how to take down enemies using the nuke weapon and charged dart rifle. Good way to make them dance before they turn radioactive. Top laugh indeed. The article is titled, "Radiation Killed the Dinosaurs," and features screenshots of enemies in the game turning radioactive after being hit by the nuke weapon. February 1999. Takes me back. The next page, oh crikey, it's a walkthrough for level 5 of GoldenEye 007 on the N64. Back in '97, this game was the bee's knees, wasn't it? It's all about Bond, in it, taking down those pesky aliens and blowing up their master computer with satchel charges. Good times. The guide shows you how to find level 6 keys, warp portals, an eagle feather, and how to take down force field generators. Blimey, it's all quite a bit of a grind when you look back at it. Still, we all got through it somehow, didn't we? The next page dives into Turok 2, Seeds of Evil. It's a how-to guide, walking you through different bits of the game like finding alien embryos, satchel charges, and taking down the Queen boss. There's a walkthrough, with screenshots showing where to go and what to do, focusing on specific objectives. They give tips on how to fry aliens with the flamethrower, and how to make sure you have enough space between you and the Queen boss while aiming for that watermelon on her shoulders. I remember Turok 2 being quite a looker back then on the N64, a solid first-person shooter, and something about a guide in a magazine made it feel so official. Good times, huh? The next page is a walkthrough for level 6 of a game. I'm not entirely sure what game it is from the screenshots, but it involves collecting ion capacitors and recalibrating power generators. plus destroying assembly plants. Sounds like a bit of a typical N64 shooter, which we had plenty of back then. There's a primogen key to collect, and various numbered instructions to guide you through the level, complete with screenshots. It's all fairly standard stuff for a game guide, really. I probably would have used it back in the day if I'd been stuck, but I generally preferred to figure things out myself. Good times. This page shows a walkthrough for Turok 2, Seeds of Evil on the N64. It's got tips on finding ion capacitors, power cells, warp portals, and power generators. There's a handy guide on how to beat the mother boss, you know, the jump rope trick, to dodge those tentacles. Good times. Plus, a strategy for tackling the primogen boss, complete with advice on avoiding his claw and those pesky flying robots. Makes me want to dust off the old N64 and give it another go. This page is all about multiplayer tips for GoldenEye 007 on the N64. GC bar. The page has some general tips for succeeding in multiplayer games, such as going for headshots and adjusting weapon availability to make matches more challenging, with the writer suggesting limiting weapons to assault rifles only, or having no cerebral bores, ZY bores, at all. There are also some tips for playing as a raptor, and the suggestion to memorize weapon and health locations. The page also describes some of the weapons available, with a brief description of each, including the crossbow, charged dart rifle, assault rifle, plasma rifle, firestorm cannon, cerebral bore, ZY bore, grenade launcher and scorpion launcher. The next page details the multiplayer characters of Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, released on the Nintendo 64. It's broken down into character types like all-rounders, regenerators, and specialities. Each character has a little blurb about their abilities and playstyle, and the reviewer's given them a style description like aggressive or psycho. In the all-rounders category, there's Turok, Taliset, Joshua Fireseed, Campaigner and Flesh Eater, so not an incredible amount of variety there. And in the regenerators we have Gant and Fireborn. In the specialities, there's just Sloth and Raptor, so not a lot of characters overall. Reading this now, it's clear that these are the sorts of things we looked for in character selection at the time, something like high regeneration or high damage that would tempt you away from the standard Turok dude. Seems simple now, doesn't it? But back then, experimenting with characters was a big part of the fun. The review encourages players to experiment and find a character that suits them, rather than just picking the one with the most health. There's also a line about an in-office cry of, "It's boring time," which is followed by a splat sound effect, which is pretty funny and relatable to a lot of us back then. The article ends with a little farewell to Iguana's classic Turok 2, and a promise of more content to come. The next page is from N64 Magazine. It looks like we're in the tips section, called Tips, EXT. Horia. First up is NBA Courtside. I remember that, it was alright for a bit of arcade basketball action. Apparently you can unlock secret teams of aliens by holding L at the preseason menu, then you have to enter a crazy button combo. It says it takes you through some unrelated screens. Whoa. Then we have Rush 2, and a list of cheats. I remember trying to put these in, sometimes they worked. There's a cheat for a limo, invisible car, and a way to access the cheat menu by holding L, R and Z at the setup screen and pressing all the C buttons. Inside the cheat menu you can activate things like Invisible Track, Killer Rats, and New York Cabs. There are also codes listed to activate Massive Mass, Killer Rats, New York Cabs, and Resurrect in Place, plus Frame Scale, Tyree Scaling, Auto Abort, and Game Timer. Yeah, good luck remembering all that, Warrington. This page from the mag is all about cheat codes in it. How do you beat the strike if you want NBA action this year? Employ alien players. All the cheats you need are used, is the main headline. First up, there's NFL Blitz for the N64, remember that one? Mental arcade-style football, proper over the top. There's a list of player names, and corresponding codes for unlocking them. DBN, Ed, Forden, Gatson, Gene, Gentil, Beth, Bill's Brain, Brian, Carrington Daniel, Grinch, Guido Jappel, Jason, Jennifer Mayer, Jimma Ek. I remember having a go on the Blitz back in the day, but I never really got into it. Then there's a classic tip for Formula 1 World Grand Prix. It talks about how to unlock extra drivers and a bonus track. Changing driver Williams's name to Pyrite or Chrome gets you the gold or silver drivers. Vacation gets you a Hawaii track. I can see it now, those slightly ropey graphics, and the blocky looking cars. It's no Gran Turismo, that's for sure. This page features Dr. Kit's Game Clinic from N64 Magazine, which was always a fun read back in the day. He's like the gaming agony uncle, doling out advice and solutions with a bit of a quirky persona. There's a letter from someone struggling with Mystical Ninja, which was a good laugh with It's slightly ropey graphics but good sense of humor. Dr. Kits gives a hand with a puzzle involving Sasuke. Then there's a question about using the panda border in 1080 degrees. Snowboarding, remember that one? Solid snowboarding game on the N64. Dr. Kits provides some button press wizardry to unlock it. Bori. Someone else is asking about a glitched wrestler in WCW vs NWO, and Dr. Kits runs through possible secret characters like Diamond Dallas Page, Randy Savage, and the like. I remember wrestling games being all the rage at the time. Finally, there's a question about a ghost car in F1 World Grand Prix, which Dr. Kits reveals is a hidden feature linked to the game's best course record. I never knew that, so I guess you learn something new every day. Warrington. It ends with a call for gamers to send in their queries, and a cutout section with Dr. Kits in a bottle. The next page is all about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Seems the N64 Magazine hotline was flooded with calls about it, which isn't surprising really, it was a massive game. They even joke about having to go back and actually play the game themselves, as if it's a chore to play such a great game. The main focus is a guide to finding heart containers to give you an extra bar on your life gauge. They list what you need, where to find the heart container, and what you have to do to get it. For example, you need to be adult, Link with the Goron tunic, and you can find a heart container in Death Mountain Crater, hidden in an arch in the wall, which you have to climb down to reach. It also shows you how to find a couple of locations where you can get a heart container, like where you need to make the Scarecrow's song on Zora's River, and play it, and win the bug catching contest. It was all pretty handy back in the day when the internet wasn't what it is now. Haha podcast. The next page, eh? Right, looking at this, it's all about getting help with your Nintendo 64 games, and ways to find extras in The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. So it's pushing the Nintendo hotline. Remember those days? You'd ring up for tips. They were claiming their staff were the best gamers in the country, open pretty much all the time, dealing with thousands of calls. It mentions 2,000 calls a day across all Nintendo platforms, which included the SNES, off SNES, and the Game Boy at the time. They were bragging about doubling their staff. I bet they were raking it in at 50p a minute. It mentions you could also use an automated service, which probably wasn't much use back then. The page also gives a guide to finding heart containers in Zelda, Ocarina of Time, the big dungeons where you beat the bosses like Golma, King Dodongo, Baronade, Phantom Ganon, Volvagia, Morpha, Bongo Bongo, and Twin Rover. Good times. Plus, it gives locations for the magic bean beds and what you get for planting beans there. The Kakariko Graveyard Bean Bed allows you to collect a piece of heart hidden in a crate. Warrington Mailvoigt. The next page is a competition called Win £1,000 of High-Tech. The premise is to design your own Silicon Valley animal for fun and profit. The text talks about playing Dr. Frankenstein and grafting limbs, referencing Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. Getting a bit dark there, eh? They mention the Nintendo 64 game Space Station Silicon Valley and the mutants within it, wondering what kind of creature you might create, like a 12-buttocked pig with Fusoya's face, or a mouse with Mark Green-style size 19 feet splayed at right angles to its body. Pretty bonkers stuff. The prize is £1,000 worth of high-tech gadgets, from CD players to night vision goggles, and 5 runners-up get a copy of Space Station Silicon Valley. There's a section called A Grand Day Out, showcasing gadgets you could buy with that money, including a JVCH RS9500SVH SVCR, a Storm Navigator watch with a compass, thermometer and torch, and a 3Com Palm 2 IPDA. Remember those? Organizing your life and doing enigmatic business things apparently. The next page is a competition called Worth Gadgets Valley for the runners-up, with some electronic gadgets, like a Sony MRS-DRE1 mini-disc mixing station for creating neighbor-bothering tunes, an M1 Multimedia Explorer, an infinite frequency expander, a Sony ICDV-21 miniature voice recorder, and a Kenwood DVD player. There's also a Pioneer Loopmaster, which is completely transparent. The competition rules state that employees of Future Publishing and Take-Two aren't eligible, and failure to observe this rule is punishable by death. That's a bit harsh, isn't it? The winning entry is chosen in a traditional West Country manner, by rolling a greased Jess monkey from the top of Glastonbury Tor. Now that sounds like a laugh. The next page from N64 Magazine is the I'm the Best section, always a good read to see who's lording it over us all. We've got some chap named John Helam getting a Star Performance Award for doing well in Yoshi's story. Fair play, I suppose. Cricket. There's some news on the F1 World Grand Prix times. Apparently, James Hegarty's time on the Magny Cours circuit was so good they reckon he must have nearly broken the car. They're still accepting times for the F1 League. The magazine is after V-Rally Arcade 2 times this month, with a Mako pad up for grabs. I remember those. Pretty decent kit back in the day. Of course, there's the GoldenEye 007 fastest agent times table. Caverns, Bunker 2, Control and Cradle are featured. A bunch of names are listed, including Stelios Giamarellos, Zahir Ishani, Ryan Bledsoe, Gary Henry, David Nicol, Sam Fenwick, Andrew Mills, Jonathan Gunn, Jan-Erik Spangberg and Oliver Carson. We also have the Super Mario 64 Peach Slide leaderboard with Stelios Giamarellos, Ayuri Gay, Kivilo Kare, Dave Bloomer, Peter Shaw, and Trev Henderson. Lastly, there's the Fighter's Destiny fastest timetable, with James Green, Richard O'Connell, Thomas Rice, Aidan Marriott, and Lee McGrady featured. Good on them! The next page is a real blast from the past, a Club 64 contact page, basically a classified section for N64 enthusiasts. It's divided into sections: fanzines, help wanted, games wanted, pen pals, and games to swap. In the fanzines section, people are flogging and after homemade mags about Nintendo. One bloke selling the Golden Files about GoldenEye sounds like it's a must-have for any Bond fan back then. The help wanted bit is pretty funny. One gamer is stuck on Banjo-Kazooie and needs help filling the moat in Gobi's Valley. Another needs some assistance finding the jiggies in Banjo-Kazooie secret puzzle game. Those were the days. Games Wanted is full of people searching for specific titles like USA Mario 64, boxed naturally, Final Fantasy II I on the SNES, again boxed with all the maps, and NES with Zelda games. The Pen Pals section is a proper snapshot of the time, full of kids looking for like-minded mates who love Nintendo. It's quite sweet really, all those lonely hearts writing in. Plenty of 10-16-year-olds looking for pals with the common interest of N64, some are quite specific like ones who hate PlayStation and love GoldenEye. Finally, games to swap. Loads of folks trying to trade titles like Turok, GoldenEye, Wave Race 64, and the usual suspects. One person will swap GT64 for most games. Another gamer offering a swap for IS-98, Mortal Kombat 4, or Turok 2. Good times. There is a small section named Yoshi Story, in Japanese. The next page, Looks like we're diving headfirst into Contact Club, a section filled with gamers trying to swap and sell their precious N64 carts. It was a common sight in the back of magazines back then. There's a whole load of games being thrown about. People wanting to swap things like Mission Impossible, Lylat Wars, Super Mario 64 and Turok for whatever else they can get their hands on. I even spot someone offering their mint copy of Quake for a Lamborghini cheeky sod. Seems a lot of people are after GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie, those were the big hitters back then. Moving on, it seems like folks are flogging their wares in the games for sale section. GoldenEye, Madden 64, Fighter's Destiny, and Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey 98, all boxed. For £30 seems like a fair price. One person is flogging a load of titles, the usual suspects like Blast Corps, Turok, Mario, Rampage, Fighter's Destiny, and Extreme G, all for £35 each or £270 for the lot. Someone's offloading a SNES, that's SNES by the way, with a Super Scope, and games like Mario Paint and Street Fighter, all for £75, which might tempt a few retro collectors. There's a list of games and their prices: Zelda 64, F1 World Grand Prix, GoldenEye, Super Mario, Mario Kart, DKR, Mystical Ninja, Wave Race, Blast Corps, Yoshi's Story, Top Gear Rally, Extreme G, ISS 64, and Mischief Makers, all going for between £15 and £30, boxed with instructions. Wipeout, 64 inches, is being sold in mint condition with its box for £45, which is a pretty penny. There is also a Tetris Attack for the SNES, which is still factory sealed for £20. That's quite a rare find. I see a couple of NBA Courtside, Nagano Winter Olympics and Wave Race 64 inches games boxed, and in decent condition for £20, £30. Someone's selling Yoshi's Story, Blast Corps, Shadows of the Empire, Mischief Makers, for £20 each too. And finally, a Rampage World Tour, Mario 64, Turok, GoldenEye, and Banjo-Kazooie, selection from £20, £30. The next page is an interview with Dave Jones, who's Scottish and worked on Lemmings, and Silicon Valley. They're asking if he can withstand the ultimate test. It also notes he stood up to Nintendo. Shupula. There's a pink bunny figure on the page, and at the bottom it calls Dave Jones, the creative director of DMA and Gremlin. Below the Dave Jones text, in the background, is some artwork of a blue gremlin. The next page features an interview with David Jones, the creative director at DMA and Gremlin. He talks about the importance of maintaining a high standard of quality in their games, and trying to come up with fresh, original ideas. He reels off a list of games he's been involved with, including Menace, Blood Money, the Lemmings series, Walker, Hired Guns, Uniracers, or Unirally depending on where you are, Body Harvest, Silicon Valley and Grand Theft Auto. Blimey, that's quite a back catalogue. Walker. David reckons there isn't enough quality in games on PC, Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, and it can be a bit sad when you think of how many games come out. He puts this down to the game scene being around for a long time, with people being used to playing games, so it's harder to create a new experience. I can't really argue there, mate. The interview delves into why so many games fail, with David highlighting the pressures from publishers, managers and project managers, and the need to fight tooth and nail to maintain quality. He also talks about his early days, learning to program on the ZX81, and his first game, Menace, a shoot-'em-up on the Amiga. He says he managed to get it published with Psygnosis, and it made him about £10,000 to £15,000, not bad for a student. There's also a screenshot from Body Harvest, which was awesome at the time. From DMA. A bit ropey now, mind. The next page features a special interrogation with Dave Jones from DMA Design. It was Silicon Valley smashing stuff back then. He reflects on how game development was getting tougher, with programmers needing to specialize more, unlike the good old days when you could master a Spectrum in a few months. He talks about the best way for new designers to get started, suggesting they mess about with level editors like Unreal and Quake. Jones says that for him it's all about the atmosphere in a game, mentioning DMA's Wild Metal Country, where you're meant to believe the robots are alive and can hear you. He touches on the difference between the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, noting that Nintendo aimed younger, while Sony went for an older audience. He reckons Nintendo games had to be more polished, while you could get away with less on the PlayStation, which was true. To be fair, Nintendo were real sticklers for quality in their first-party titles. He mentions that what is great about games is that you can do things you wouldn't dare do in real life. His favorite moment on the N64 was the first level of GoldenEye, which brought a new style of game to the machine. They really did capture that series of films and a great character. He's played GoldenEye on easy, Mario Session Zelda, soon to be finished. Taekwondo. When asked if he was a Diddy Kong Racing or Mario Kart man, he picked Mario Kart, saying it was a purer racing experience and simpler structure, but the Diddy Kong elements are very nice, but if he wanted a racing game, he'd rather something pure like Mario Kart. Finally, his ultimate ambition for a DMA game is to build a realistic world, where players can change the rules and do things they wouldn't dare do in real life. The image is a photo of what appears to be an early screenshot of the world of Wild Metal Country, and a photo of Dave Jones behind a drum kit with a cymbal, and the statement that he acknowledges a fevered crowd during his 20-minute solo spot live at Budokan in '78. The next page features a coming soon tease for the next issue of N64 Magazine, with Jet Force Gemini headlining. They're asking all the important questions we were all pondering at the time. Will it be any good? What's with the dog? Screenshots of the game are scattered around the page. There's a promise of a new 16-page section in the next issue. It's all very mysterious. They threaten to kill you if they tell you what it's about. How dramatic. The magazine also promises tips for The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, and even some Ocarina tunes. And there is also South Park, being touted as one of the funniest games, even if it's not the most complicated. A screenshot of Cartman throwing snowballs is shown. The next page of N64 Magazine, issue 26, promises a look at Michael Owen's World League Soccer, a title hoping to challenge the dominance of ISS International Superstar Soccer on the Nintendo 64 and perhaps even FIFA. The reviewed section highlights Goemon 2, All-Star Tennis, and Superman. Screenshots of Smash Bros, Tonic Trouble, and Disney Tetris feature, so it looks like they are reviewed in the magazine. The blurb on Free advertises another double game guide, a staple of the magazine back then. The double game guide features Body Harvest and Silicon Valley. There is a picture of the Body Harvest game guide cover, which features the official guide designation badge. The page also lists a variety of content inside the magazine. There's first news on loads of new N64 games, stacks of new tips and cheats. You've got Japanese and American games reviewed, Club 64, Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, I'm the Best, reader reviews, Skill Club 64, and the chance to win a car in the V-Rally competition. Plus, there's help wanted ads, contacts, every single N64 game reviewed and rated, and a section called What If. The issue is marked as official, and the on-sale date is Tuesday the 23rd of February. The next page has a feature on NBA Hanging Time, a game that raised a few eyebrows back in the day. According to the producer Leroy Kulak, the game is aimed at Europeans who would rather die than play basketball, apparently. There's a creator-player mode, and once you lose a match, you get to execute the losing player in a variety of ways, with options like hanging, gassing, shooting, electrocution, and freeform. The freeform option involves hunting down the losing player first-person style with improvised weapons like steam irons and razor blades. Seems a bit much, even for a 90s arcade-style sports game. The index on the right lists a bunch of other games featured in the issue, including All-Star Tennis Future Look, Battle Tanks, Carmageddon, Chameleon Twist 2, Magical Tetris, Mario Golf, Mario Party, Micro Machines, Milo's Astro Lanes, Monaco Racing Sim, Nightmare Creatures, Penny Racers, Pikachu Genki Dechu, Rayman 2, Rogue Squadron Shadowman, Snowboard Kids 2 South Park, Turok 2, Win Back and Guides for Zelda. There's also a competition to win V-Rally. Ah, the memories. Nointon no. There's a blurb about the release dates of the next issue. Kiryu.